In a world made of blocks, where every mountain can be conquered and every cave hides secrets, a threat awakens from the deepest abyss. This is not just a simple story of construction, it's a fight for survival. Today I bring you the complete summary of Minecraft the movie. The story begins with Steve, a boy who was always fascinated by exploring mines, but this wouldn't be possible as only adults could enter, and so it ends with him being frightened by a strange figure. Years later, we see Steve working as a door handle salesman, but we see that he is not satisfied, as this was not the job he wanted. It was while eating one day that he remembered his obsession with exploring the mines. Determined, he returns to the mines once again. There, he encounters the same old man, but this time nothing would stop him. While mining, he finds two very rare artifacts that, when combined, created a portal. This portal takes him to a wonderful world, a place where imagination became reality. Steve built his house, and during the day he was happy building everything he could imagine. However, at night it was the opposite, as a monster would appear and he felt very lonely. Until one day, a wild wolf appeared trying to attack him. Steve gave it a bone and they ended up becoming best friends. He named it Dennis and together they began to explore and build Steve's world. Everything seemed perfect until one day they discovered a structure shaped like a portal. Next to it was a chest containing very strange objects. Steve completed the portal and thus managed to access a very strange world, the Nether. A dark and fiery place inhabited by piglins, humanoid steel creatures whose obsession was gold. The place was ruled by a sorceress named Malgocha, whose intention was to destroy the outside world and thus extract its riches. Steve, unaware of anything, hands over the artifact and ends up being captured. Realizing that the world was in danger, he manages to steal the cube, and he gives it to Dennis, who immediately crosses the portal to hide the cube in Steve's house. Thus, the portal is closed, and as long as the cube is well hidden, the outside world is not in danger. Now we meet Garrett, a professional video game player who became very popular and has achieved it all. However, he is currently at his lowest point, as his store is bankrupt to the extent that he receives an eviction notice. He quickly meets with his friend Daryl, who tells him about an auction for a container that had a very popular game inside. Garrett is interested in this and decides to participate, offering up to $900. However, upon opening the box, he realizes there is no video game, only some strange cubes that he doesn't know the purpose of. Now we meet Henry and his older sister Natalie, who are moving to another city after their mother's passing as she got a job and a very cheap house. In their new home, they are greeted by Dawn, a real estate agent who offers condolences for their mother's passing. The next day, Natalie makes a pizza for her brother to share at school and make new friends. Now we see Garrett, who is stocking items in his store, when out of nowhere it seems. Henry offers him a piece of his pizza in exchange for some advice about school. Garrett tells him that friendship is like a puzzle, sometimes you're just missing a few pieces to feel complete. Motivated, Henry heads to school. There he meets his principal, who during the conversation mentions that she just got out of a romantic relationship. In class, he encounters his physics and arts teacher, who doesn't really like Henry's style, as he thinks his ideas are absurd, causing his classmates to make fun of him. Instead, Henry decides to create his project, thus assembling a flying backpack which, when tested, doesn't work well and ends up crashing into the factory where his sister works. The principal asks Henry to call his guardian, otherwise he has no option. He calls Garrett and asks him to pretend to be his uncle in exchange for $26. Already in the store, Henry finds the cubes and asks Garrett what they are for, to which he responds that he doesn't know either. Moments later, they find a note that clearly states never to try to join both objects. Curiosity gets the better of them, and they end up joining the blocks, which guides them to the mine where Steve had entered. Meanwhile, Natalie is worried about her brother, and thanks to Zaldon, they manage to locate him through an app and head to the location. In the mine, the kids find a portal, but it ends up absorbing all of them, taking them to the world of Minecraft. Everyone is amazed to see the wonderful world. There, they find a pink sheep, however, they were not alone as a villager was watching them, and it ends up crossing the portal to the real world. We move to the Nether, where we see the witch demanding more gold from the piglins, or else they will be turned into food. At that moment, she notices the signal from the cube that has returned to its original world. She heads there with Steve, whom she had as a prisoner, and orders him to get the cube if he wants his wolf Dennis to stay alive. Meanwhile, in the outside world, we see the villager coming out of the mines, and suddenly, Dennis comes running back. On the other hand, Garrett continues trying to communicate with the sheep with the aim of gaining some wealth. With some audios from Dennis, night falls. From the darkness emerge skeletons, creepers, and zombies that do not hesitate to attack our protagonists. Henry accidentally crashes into a tree, breaking the block, and thus discovering that he can build with it, and thanks to his creativity, he quickly forms a shelter. While Garrett hides, a creeper explodes very close to him. He runs towards the base, but a group of shadows chases them, and when all seemed lost, Steve appears to save them until the sun starts to rise and the monsters end up burning. Steve explains that he has only come for the creation cube. However, it has broken during the battle, and Natalie refuses to give him the cube, as her priority is to return home. Steve explains that this is now impossible, as they broke a part of the cube, and the only way to repair it is by visiting the mansion, a place full of dangers. Meanwhile, on Earth, the villager is run over by the principal, who fears a possible lawsuit. She opts to invite him to dinner. Meanwhile, the kids arrive at a village where they meet the imposing Iron Golem, the one in charge of protecting the village. Steve gives them a demonstration of how to cook food, and he warns Garrett that it is very hot as it has been cooked by lava, while the hurried one ends up burning himself. On the other hand, we see how Margosha summons the strongest pig, General Chungus, and tells him that Steve has betrayed them and that he must get the cube. The witch gives them a potion to prevent turning into a zombie. Meanwhile, our characters prepare to go to the mansion. But first, Steve shows them his house, where he has the tools they will need to venture into the mansion. Garrett finds a Len pearl that teleports you to a place where you throw it. Steve shows them the crafting table used to create new weapons. Henry combines real-life objects with game objects, creating an incredible weapon. Later, Garrett asks Steve to speak in private, and he shows him that he has the cube and that he will only give it in exchange for diamonds. Steve admits that he has many diamonds in the mine, so they must go to get them. Meanwhile, the girls obtain the map to the mansion. However, they are interrupted by an army of piglins, led by General Chungus. The battle begins and Garrett accidentally ends up knocking out Steve. He faces the general but is easily defeated. The guys flee, saying they will meet again at the mansion. Steve pulls out a pair of wings but realizes he only has two, so he decides to jump on Garrett, and thus begins an aerial chase with lots of explosions and destruction. In the end, they land safely in a place full of pandas. Meanwhile, the director enjoys a date with the villager, talking about her romantic past. On the other hand, the witch scolds General Chungus for the failure and ends up releasing the Great Pig, and Chunguk ends up being turned into a chop. The furious beast goes in search of the cube. At that moment, the girls encounter the wolf Dennis. Dom gives him a bone to gain his trust and thus guide him to Steve. The boys arrive at the mine, thus obtaining the precious diamond, but they are interrupted by a strong smell. It's the Great Pig. With no other choice, they decide to flee in some carts, but they run out of energy and end up stranded on a creeper farm. With no other option, Garrett gets down to push the carts to the next piece of energy. At that moment, the Great Pig appears, but before leaving, they hit the creepers to activate them and blow up the place. A dangerous plan, but they manage to escape successfully. After a long walk, they arrive at the mansion. Steve creates a plan explaining that the mansion has 3 floors. On the first floor are the warrior villagers equipped with axes. And on the second floor, they are guarded by powerful wizards, the Evokers. And the third floor is where the crystal is, and it is guarded by the powerful Enderman, whom one must not look in the eyes. While the adults distract, Henry goes in search of the crystal. They manage to get the crystal, but he accidentally makes eye contact with the Enderman. Henry defends himself with an axe he had found, defeating the Enderman and obtaining an Ender Pearl. Meanwhile, Garrett and Steve face a zombie riding a chicken. After a long battle, they manage to defeat it, and the team runs out of the mansion. But on the bridge, their worst enemy, Malgoka, was waiting for them, who quickly snatches the cube from them. Steve and Henry jump onto a balloon. However, Garrett says that if he's going to die, he'll do it in style, deciding to face the piglins. At that moment, a great explosion occurs on the bridge, causing Henry and Steve to crash, leaving them unconscious. Steve wakes up and reunites with his loyal friend Dennis, who is accompanied by Natalie and Dawn. At that moment, Malgocha uses the cube to darken the place and bring in her army, as the sun was covered, and there is no danger of turning into a zombie. To stop all this, the kids devise a plan by creating strong armor and summoning an army of golems. Thus, the fierce battle against the piglins begins. Seeing the situation, the witch unleashes her great beast to defeat them. Henry uses his Puebla de Lejen to approach the energy orb, Oniding, but at that moment, the creature fires at him, knocking him into the void. When all seemed lost, Garrett appears in the balloon to save him. The battle reaches its final part, and Steve faces the witch with diamond armor. Meanwhile, the wolves attack the great beast, and Henry causes the energy tower to collapse, making the cube fall into the beast's hands. At that moment, the golem appears, defeating it with a very powerful blow, and once again the cube ends up in Natalie's hands. The sunlight reappears, burning the enemies, while the witch weakens and tries to deceive Steve, but she fails and ends up defeated. The battle had finally ended, and Steve invites Henry to stay, but he decides to return home. He also makes the difficult decision to entrust his loyal friend Dennis to Dawn, so he can accompany him on Earth. The boys decide to cross the portal, and Steve is left pondering, but in the end he crosses as well. Back on Earth, Darren reopens his shop by creating a video game and inspired by what he has experienced, and it becomes a huge success once again. Dawn now lives adventures alongside Dennis, while Natalie opens a self-defense course thanks to everything she learned. Meanwhile, Henry continues with his invention and creativity. This is how the movie ends, but we have a post-credit scene showing that the director learned to speak the villager language. Thus ends this incredible adventure in the universe of Mikra, a story that reminds us that even in a cube world, courage, friendship, and determination can change everything. Everything. If you liked the summary, don't forget to subscribe for more epic stories. See you in the next video.